Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be taking out these two stumps here, the lilac on the left here, which is a multi-stemmed shrub, and the pear tree at the back here, which has just got a single stem. So I'd like to use this opportunity to also tell you how I take the stumps out, what kind of technique I use. I've been a gardener for about 4 or 5 years in Edinburgh, and there's a certain technique I've always used and it works quite well. Basically you use a mattock and a spade. You don't need any other tools, and it's fairly easy. What you do need though is a bit of strength. It is quite a demanding way of doing it, but it comes out quite quickly, and it means that you don't have any roots or stump left in the ground, so you can have the ground ready and prepared for anything else you're going to do with it. So the situation I have here is I want to clear this space because these shrubs and trees were too big. They weren't really giving me what I wanted. The lilac was a large shrub, only flowered in spring. I want something with a bit more interest all year round. The pear on the right, it didn't really ripen too well because it's in Scotland and our summers are a little bit too cool for it. So that's the reason I'm taking them out. I also want to clear the space to put in a shed in the corner as well. So that's the reason that these are needing to come out. The trees at the back I'm going to be keeping. So when it comes to pruning the trees, what we want to do is leave at least 1 meter or 2 of stem. That gives you leverage. If you don't have the leverage, this technique can still work, but it's a lot more difficult. So with this multi-stemmed structure here, this will be the most difficult one to take out because it's not one strong stem. You can see some of these here are quite flexible. If you've got a lot of give in the stem, then when you pull on it, all your energy is just going into flexing the stem. You're not actually going into loosening the roots. So multi-stemmed will be the most difficult shrub or tree to take out. This one here is a lilac, and when lilacs are cut down to the base, what normally happens is lots of suckers come up from all the root system. So with this one I need to make sure I take out a decent amount of roots, otherwise I'm going to get lots of suckers coming up. With the pear tree here, it's a much more simple job. I've left about 2 meters of trunk here. Also it's a nice solid trunk. Any give in the trunk when I'm pulling it at the moment is actually at the roots, so I'm going to get plenty of leverage for this. It's going to be quite easy to remove. It's quite a big trunk, so it's quite a substantial tree. With a spade or somebody would really struggle to take this out. Normally people would probably just cut this off at the base. It's probably about 20 centimeters in width, something like that. I've used this technique on trees which are about 4 or 5 times the size of this. Technique still works quite well, although there is a limit to how big a tree you can do this with. When you get to about 2 or 3 foot in width, the tree, you really need to start thinking about stump grinders or something more heavy and mechanical machinery to do it instead. So these are the two tools that I'll be using. The spade, I'm probably not going to use much at all, to be honest. The spade is just because it's easier to dig with. If I need to dig around a root to expose it a bit easier, the spade is one to use. But it's the mattock I'm really going to be using. It's a fantastic tool for this. I'll actually put a link into the description for the Amazon link for this. It's a great tool. You can get lots of different models. This is a particular model that I'm using. It's a really good tool. It's quite heavy. You have to make sure if you're not very strong, then this isn't probably not the kind of mattock for you. You want to maybe get a smaller one, something a bit smaller, but this is quite a heavy duty mattock, about the size of a pickaxe. It's a fair weight as well. When using this you do have to be careful. There's a few safety precautions. You need to make sure when you assemble it with the shaft and the head that you actually attach it properly and make sure it's well attached with friction. You can also put some screws in as well or something to glue it in a bit tighter, because there is a risk that this can slide down and hit you in the head when using it. So when using this, always have to take a lot of precautions. So if you are going to use this, I would recommend watching some safety videos first. It's quite a dangerous tool if not used correctly. Sharp point, there's a lot of weight to it. That could easily break a bone in your leg or damage your feet. Also always wear steel toe caps when using this tool. And if you do raise it above your head, be very careful, make sure you follow all the safety precautions. I'm not going to be going through that because I'm not qualified in safety precautions for using a mattock, but I've used it for many years without any injuries, and it's a great tool when you know how to use it. But you do have to be careful because it is quite a powerful tool, and it makes short work of the roots, and it'll easily make short work of anyone's bones. So it's a great tool, as I say. It's got this kind of larger section. This is great for digging or cutting away smaller roots. And this section at the back here, I actually use this like an axe. If I've got some really thick roots, I cut through the roots with the axe using this. So what I'm going to do is, using the spade probably at first to dig a trench, I'll go around the trees, expose where the main roots are. I'll then start working with the mattock. I'll start hacking away the roots like an axe with the mattock, chop the roots off. Once I've got most of the roots off, I'll start wiggling the tree. I'll then feel how loose it is, and with wiggling it you can kind of tell where the attachment points are, and then you know roughly what side of the tree you need to start digging to find a deeper root. If you're lucky and most of the roots are towards the surface, it's a very easy job. You just need to use the mattock to cut them all off. The ones that can be difficult is if you have any roots going straight down underneath. They're a lot more difficult to cut, as you have to dig out a big hole to the side of the tree, then be able to swing the mattock in and cut that off. Another option is to use an old saw. If you do use a saw, I would use an old rusty one. Don't use a good new one, because if you use a saw on roots, the dirt on the roots will blunten your saw very quickly. So never use a good saw with that, and never use a chainsaw either, because the dirt is really not good for chainsaws, and you're going to flick up a huge amount of dust and dirt. So I'll set up the tripod now, start filming it. As I say, this is going to be the trickiest one. I need to make sure I get a decent amount of roots out. I might not get all the roots out in this video. I'll definitely take the stump out. What I'll probably have to do is follow the roots away from the stump, take out as much of that as possible, as I need to make sure that's well cleared, otherwise that will sucker up really easily. The pear tree, that doesn't sucker as badly. Once the stump is out, I don't really need to worry about the existing roots as long as they're not too thick. So this one should be a lot easier, and you should be able to see that in the video. I won't have to cut a huge amount around here, and there should be less roots as well. So this will probably have 3 or 4 big thick roots. Once they're cut, this thing will easily go. Plenty of leverage. And the good thing with the lever is basically you don't have to completely cut all the roots, as long as you destabilize it enough. With that huge amount of leverage you've got there with a 2-meter trunk, you can rip out roots which you would never normally be able to rip out by hand. Just because of the leverage, you can work that to your advantage, and you can easily pull out a tree. There was a tree I pulled out earlier in this garden. It was somewhere between the apple tree and this in thickness. That had 2 meters of height on it, and I actually just managed to rip that out without using any mattocks or anything, just purely using leverage. So leverage really is your main thing here. Make sure there's plenty of trunk on it, plenty of height. When you're pulling on it, pull it from a high up point. Not too high that it's uncomfortable to pull from, but the higher you pull from, the more leverage you'll get. And it's really leverage you want to be using. Now, you will also need to cut a few roots if it's a bigger trunk, but I'll show you how I do that. So I'll set the video on a time lapse now. Now, when using the mattock, if you do have any health problems, I would advise it. It's extremely strenuous. Even 3 or 4 major hits with the mattock will take all the energy out of you, because pulling it up and swinging it down takes up a lot more energy than you'd expect, and it takes out energy from your whole body. It's not just your arms you're using your abdomen, your legs, everything. So it's very physically demanding, so don't use it if you have any kind of health complaints, which advise you against doing strenuous exercise, as this is extremely strenuous. Probably pretty similar to snow clearing, or maybe even more strenuous, to be honest, than snow clearing. So I won't be talking much whilst I'm doing this, because I'll be so out of breath. I probably won't be very easy to understand, so that's why I'm putting it on a time lapse, and hopefully you can see what kind of technique I use. So the lilac was actually easy enough to take out. The main trunk on it was just about strong enough that I could pull the whole thing over with that. What I did is I cleared a slightly bigger circle for this one than I will with the pear. The reason being, this has roots that can sucker quite easily, and as I say before, I'll probably try and get some extra roots out just to make sure it doesn't sucker too much. This one was fairly easy because it had mostly surface roots and there are lots of small roots. It had one large root going straight down, as you can see here, but what's quite easy about this is when this was put in the ground, it was already pot bound. A lot of the roots were actually twisted around themselves, so it didn't have a very well formed root system. I cut off the ones here and here that were slightly larger, and then all that was really left was this big one right at the bottom, which was quite deep down. I did chip this a little bit to weaken it, but with the leverage and with the other roots taken out, it was quite easy just to snap that, pulling it over. And then here with the pear tree, I gave you a close-up where I was cutting it with the end of the mattock like an axe. This was a particularly big root here. I've gone through that completely. There's another decent sized root here, which I've cut through. And this one, although I tried to cut it here, the shock from cutting it actually snapped it off at the base where it started. So this is still held on by some fairly substantial roots, but because of the leverage and because I've taken off the larger surface roots, this should now break quite easily. So I'll set the camera up now and I'll show you how easily I can pull this over with the extra leverage. And all I need to do is really use my own weight and pull back, do a bit of a rocking motion. If you can get a good rocking motion, you can use the momentum to help you. So that's the pear tree now out. It was a little bit more tricky than I expected because there was a root going straight down. So although I'd taken off most of the surface roots, there was a really quite a thick root going straight down, a nice tap root. So you can see that there. That was just ripped off by the lever action of levering it out. So this this ripped out with the first pull, but then I couldn't rip out the whole root system because there was another root attached. So the other root attached was I think one of these ones down here. Now sometimes you do need to go all the way down to one side and then back the other way with the stump to rip off all the roots. That's what you could see when I did that then. So we've got 3 substantial roots left here. What I can do is, if these aren't a problem, I can just bury them with soil. That shouldn't be an issue. Or I can use the mattock to dig these out slightly more and cut them off. These will rapidly narrow as they go through the ground and they taper off, so they're only going to be big roots towards the original trunk. Further out, once I get a foot or 2 away from the original trunk, there won't be big roots, so I can dig them out with the mattock and the smaller ones will rot off. So that's all for this video, just to quickly show you progress in my own garden for my diary purposes, and also just to show you what kind of technique I use myself. If you do use a spade, make sure it's a sturdy one. I use stainless steel because they tend to be quite strong, but try not to use the spade on any roots unless they're really quite thin roots. With the lilac here, I did cut a lot of the roots with a spade because they were quite thin, so ones that are about as thick as a finger or thinner, they were fine. Just cut through them with a spade. Anything thicker, I would recommend using the mattock. If you use a spade, you'll probably just end up breaking the spade. There's a real weak point on spades. They often get welded around about this point here. That's where the leverage goes to, so that gets the greatest strain, and that very often snaps. So don't try and pull out a tree with a spade. Use it for excavating or cutting off minor roots. If you want to dig out a stump, don't lever it out either with a spade or a mattock. You'll break that. Even the mattock would break if I levered it with that. Use either a really strong pinch bar as a lever, or ideally leave most of the trunk left on the tree when you're trimming it. That way you've got this big lever point and you can use that as leverage when you pull it out yourself. There are other ways of using ratchet straps and things. I'm not going to go into that here, but you need a good anchor point for using ratchet straps. And if you can, never ever use a vehicle. There's a lot of spring in ropes and straps, and it'll just act like a catapult, and it'll quite often, once the stump actually comes out, it will catapult it right through the back of your windscreen in your car. So don't use that if you can. That's the technique I use anyway, and I'll give you guys updates on this section of the garden as I progress with it. I need to do some site clearances, get ready for the shed, and that'll be going up sometime in winter.